Hey everybody, this is Yoli Chisholm, and it's my objective to change your perspective. This is the Ask Yoli segment where I answer questions from various sources, and you're able to find my answers on crushingcorporate.com. So let's get started. So today's question comes from Cher. Cher asks, I'd like advice for career pivot strategies from consulting into a marketing strategy or business development job in the tech industry. What do you see as the pros and cons, and what are some challenges I might face? I like this question because I actually do have some personal experience in this area, and I can share, how I did it. And I will actually talk about the how a little bit at the end of this segment, but I do want to kind of unpack some of the things that Cher will have to consider. I'm assuming she's a consultant now and has been a consultant for a number of years. And as she indicates, she wants to get into working in the technology sector and has identified sort of three areas where she can potentially pivot into. One is marketing, one is business development, and one is, I believe, strategy. And so the first thing that Cher has to consider is that consulting is very different than being sort of a worker or employee in working in an enterprise organization or even a startup where you're actually doing sort of the practical work of execution. And so the first thing she has to consider is, does she have enough practitioner skills? It's great because she's going to have an advantage of critical thinking skills, which every company needs, and being able to be strategic. And when you're doing consulting, you tend to be very sort of high level, thinking about big picture concepts and identifying how companies can turn sort of mega trends in their industry or solve problems in their industry and execute and build a plan to execute. But you tend not to be the person who is actually executing. And so one of the things that Cher, you'll have to think about is where within or a large organization or a small organization can your strategic thinking skills and your strategic planning add value. There are two considerations. So if you're going into a large organization, I've worked at big organizations like Microsoft and eBay. When you're working for large organizations, the areas that you have identified, business development, marketing, and strategy, tend to be business groups of their own. So they are a discipline onto their own. And so you will be sort of, for lack of a better way of putting it, competing with marketers who have been executing for a long period of time, or you will be competing with business development sales professionals who have been doing that for some time, or you will be looking to compete against people who are working in the strategy department. It seems to me at a large organization, the easiest transition, if you are not a practitioner in each of those areas, the easiest transition is into a strategy department within a large organization. Now, having said that, I have also made this pivot into small organizations. So whether it's a small business or a startup, where you actually might find all of those skill sets in one role. So whether it's strategy, business development, and marketing. So if you are passionate about becoming a marketer or upping your skills sort of in business development, and you still also want to be able to sort of do the strategic thinking, you may want to consider pivoting into a company that's in the tech space, but a startup or a small business. And there you'll be able to combine all three of those disciplines. So the big difference that you'll need to consider is, who are you competing against when you're trying to get into a large organization? And what will be the sort of the easiest path to leverage your existing skills to get a foot in the door in the tech space. And I will speak to, one of the biggest ways I think you can get into the tech space when you don't have sort of a lot of necessarily experience in that sector. So the first consideration, are you going for big company or small company? And how do you leverage your existing skills? The second area is when you're thinking about pros and cons, I would actually discourage you from thinking about it in that way, because anybody you talk to can make the case one way or another for making this transition or against making this transition. What you really need to be thinking about, and I know you know this, is just thinking about what is your lifestyle fit, what is your values fit, what is your sort of wish list for your career development over the next sort of 1 to 5 years. And you're going to want to be thinking about, does consulting and the current trajectory you're on fit with your life plan and where you see yourself in the next 1 to 5 years. If this is truly a desire, and it sounds like it is a desire of yours to make this pivot, you don't necessarily want to be thinking about pros and cons, but you want to be thinking about sort of lifestyle fit. However, because we are sort of conditioned to think about this way, I have thought about, a few things. So, the pros for staying in consulting, you get to work on various projects across different sectors. The cons is that you never get to sort of go deep into a particular area and become a specialist necessarily. And you certainly tend to be more theoretical and strategic versus actually being a practitioner and having the experience of actually building a business, and being able to recognize the success and failure patterns that become part of being a good operator. I am a huge fan of getting corporate experience because I think it builds the muscle of becoming a good operator and understanding what are the systems that successful corporations and businesses put into place. What are the patterns and the signals that you can only recognize from being in the trenches and actually being a practitioner building those businesses. And so the cons of staying in consulting is that you will not be able to understand what it's like to really and truly be part of a team that's building a business. The pros is that if you are a big picture thinker, that is truly your strength. And that is the area where you tend to thrive. That is the area that fits your lifestyle, being able to travel from, company to, city to city, working with different companies, looking at solving big problems across different sectors, and not necessarily being the one to sort of see your plans come into fruition, but being the ones to sort of look at a problem and suggest and make recommendations. If that's where you truly thrive, then I would say you should probably stay in consulting. And just recognize that everything that I described from a consulting job, you get to do being an employee at a corporation. You have to be a strategic thinker. You have to be problem solving. The thing that you're missing from consulting is actually being a practitioner and actually doing the work and seeing your ideas fail and learning from those, or seeing your ideas succeed and building on them. Okay. So, and I really do say, I do think being able to go deep in a sector, an industry, or a discipline. So if you truly want to become a marketer, you have to be able to go deep into sort of the discipline of marketing. If you really want to become a rock star business development, professional, you really need to be able to go deep either into an industry or a sector, and be practically working in developing partnerships and driving sales. So there are pros and cons. My advice is to think more about your career development and your lifestyle fit, and the types of organizations, the types of roles and that will be professionally fulfilling to you. All right. Challenges you might face. I think I've alluded to some of them. So if you truly decide you want to make this transition from consulting into, working in the tech sector, either in business development, marketing, you you have to become a doer. And so the challenge might be that as you are looked at alongside other people that are going after similar roles, where you may be found to be deficient is in that practical experience. And so, how do you make up for that practical experience? I will tell you how I have done that. Is I have used my free time to become a practitioner in the marketing field. And so, what I would do, for example, this is just a hypothetical example. If you happen to be, you're like, I want to go down the marketing path. I want to be able to understand strategically what's happening, as a marketing professional. What are all the marketing channels that are successful that are being leveraged depending on by the tech industry? How do they reach business decision makers today? Practically, what does that look like? Then you might start a business development blog. You might start a blog that on a particular topic in that is relevant for business decision makers, and then you may try and test different channels, marketing channels, acquisition channels, content strategies to reach those audiences, so that when you are now applying for a role, say at Google or Facebook or Microsoft or a small startup, and they ask you about acquisition strategies, you have some practical experience. The work that it takes to reach a business decision maker, to target a business decision maker to come and read your blog content, is similar to some of the work that big enterprise organizations have to do to reach business decision makers. And so while on a smaller scale you're just targeting business decision makers to come and read your blog, or attend an event, or watch a webinar, or those are all tactics that, whether you're large or small, the tactics that need to be used are all the same, and the strategic thinking is all the same, but the practical execution, you need to know what that feels like. Particularly if you're going to be coming into a role where you're managing people, you need to understand what it is you're asking them to do. And so become a doer in a category or sector that you are interested in. Become a practitioner in the field. If it is business development that you're interested in sort of developing your skill set in, then maybe you need to shadow somebody who's in biz dev or in sales. Ask somebody within your circle if you can shadow them to understand what are the social selling skills, what does a modern seller look like today. And you want to bump up your expertise with some online courses. So I alluded to having similar experience making a pivot. I was in the consumer packaged goods retail side of traditional and used traditional marketing. So advertising in newspapers and magazines, television, billboard. I was in that space for a long time, and then decided I wanted to pivot into digital marketing. Had zero digital marketing experience. I took a online, it was actually a short 6-month course. This was in the 90s. And so how I would translate that for you today is bump up your skills in the particular discipline, leveraging some online courses, as well as supplementing that with some practical experience. And that is what I alluded to earlier. So run a blog and find out, what it's going to take, or shadow a professional, so that you have some skill sets, you have the lingo. When you're interviewing, you have the lingo, and you speak to some experience, challenges that you've encountered in those fields. And finally, the thing that really made the difference for me, and where I was able to make that transition, was look for a sector in the tech industry that is fairly nascent. So that is fairly new. So where they are actually looking for people who are seasoned professionals, but where the sector itself hasn't found any sort of final answers, and is still learning, is still building best practices, is still trying to figure things out. That is the easiest way to break into the tech sector. So you want to come into an organization that is in AI, or is in AR, VR, that is, a blockchain technology, or is, so just look for sectors that are really, really young, that are looking for seasoned professionals where they haven't figured anything out. And that way, you can be part of the experience of learning, but you get your foot in the door, and they're interested in you because you are a seasoned professional. But they're not looking for someone who necessarily has expertise, because there is nobody who has expertise in that particular sector, because the sector is new. I hope that was helpful to you. Keep the questions coming. I am Yoli Chisholm. You can link to me, link with me, and connect with me on LinkedIn, or find me on crushingcorporate.com.